Good evening, everyone. I'll be talking to you today about my paper, in particular, four acts that were put in place in the 1760s that were considered the first significant crack in the loyalty or in the connection between Great Britain and the American colonies: the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the Currency Act, and the Townshend Acts. Uh, their British policy was shifting from a mere regulation of trade to imposing internal taxes, i.e., the Stamp Act. Um, these acts sparked an ideological and political challenge to British authority, and key historians have dealt with this question. In particular, I will mention three here in this video: Bernard Bailyn's book, The Ideology of American Revolution; Merrill Jensen's collection of tracts or pamphlets, public writings, Tracts of the American Revolution; and also Edmund and Helen Morgan's book, The Stamp Act Crisis, Prologue to Revolution. These books all have in common that they're all in agreement that the 1760s were a prologue, as the Morgan books says, to the American Revolution. In particular, the Stamp Act. So the Morgan book talks about virtual versus I'm highlighting virtual versus active representation. The British argument was that even though the colonists were not in Britain, they did not have representation physically in Parliament, they were virtually represented by the fact that they were British subjects, even if they were living across the ocean. That went over like a lead balloon, and the Virginia House of Burgesses made resolutions explicitly stating that taxation of people by themselves or by persons chosen to represent them is the only security against a burdensome taxation. And what they mean by that is that the Americans have the right to tax themselves, or to choose people to represent their interests in regard to taxation and any other matters. Okay, and also they reference nullification of authority, meaning organized resistance, and nullification of the Stamp Act, in particular through protest and mob actions, and that British authority. This has demonstrated the fact that British authority cannot be enforced without colonial consent, and so this became a precedent for future protests and future resistance. The Morgans argued the Stamp Act crisis, was a prologue to revolution because it forced the colonists to articulate their independent constitutional position, making future compromise difficult. And this is key in the developing of the crack between of loyalty that once existed. It was not just simply a matter of having to put up with more regulation. This was a direct threat to the sovereignty of the American colonies, and that was how they viewed themselves, that they were sovereign in their own right. They had their own assemblies, their own representatives, their own systems of government, their own commerce. And while they did import from Britain, they felt that they had reached a point where they did not have to be subjected to the whims of Parliament any longer. Also, with reference to Merrill Jensen's Tracts of the American Revolution, these tracts were selected for this compilation, basically as evidence of how the colonial position was hardening against British policy in the 1760s. Again, they were generally dissatisfied with trade regulations, but that morphed into constitutional arguments about internal taxation. So all of these sources have commonalities with regard to the constitutionality of the the British policy. And there was a call to patriotism. United action was needed. The colonies all had to be in one accord, of one mind, a united front, so to speak. And assemblies and legislatures of each state were passing resolutions and also boycotting, if you wanted to use a word from history, non-importation agreements or boycotts regarding products from Britain, refusing to import goods. So there are numerous rifts and fractures going on here, and this is a key moment in history that paves the way for later heightened action, translates into action. This is more of a agitation period where pamphlets and literature and speeches, political sermons, religious sermons, because there's also a concept, there's also a component of religious justification. We talked about that in previous modules about the religious justification for resistance, going back to the Martin Luther and John Calvin days, and how the colonists took upon, referred to those earlier times when they were making their argument for separation, talking about resisting British policies and rebelling against tyranny being an ungodly thing and something that the Bible would tell you not to obey. And they would talk about Romans 13, which was regarding the submission to authorities. But again, an authority who goes against God is no authority, and disobedience is allowable in that situation. So there's some concepts that I'm going to go over, and that I'm still working to thresh together as I get my paper into shape. So thank you for listening. I apologize that this was gone a little bit long, but I wanted to make sure that I made a somewhat clear presentation of what I plan to do. Thank you.